The gunshot cracked through the clear Nevada air like thunder, sending Hannah Dawson's heart racing as she crouched behind the rickety shed, clutching the small pouch of coins she'd just earned from 3 days of laundering the miners' filthy clothes. It was 1876, and Verdi, Nevada had seen better days since the Transcontinental Railroad had brought a flash of prosperity that was now fading like the evening sun that cast long shadows across the dusty Main Street. "Stay down, you thieving rat!" shouted Sheriff Mills, his boots pounding the packed earth as he pursued the would-be robber who had tried to snatch Hannah's hard-earned money moments before. Hannah waited until the commotion passed, then straightened her simple calico dress and patted the coin pouch securely in her pocket. Those coins meant everything: food for 5 hungry mouths, not counting her own. At 19, she hadn't expected to be the sole provider for her 4 siblings, but life in the West rarely followed expectations. 6 months ago, influenza had taken both her parents within days of each other, leaving Hannah as the head of the household. With 12-year-old Sarah, 10-year-old Michael, 8-year-old Lily, and 5-year-old James looking to her for everything, Hannah had aged years in months. "Miss Dawson," called a deep voice from behind her. "You all right? Saw that ruffian try to grab your earnings." Hannah turned to see Ethan Blackett, his tall frame silhouetted against the setting sun. The cowboy had arrived in Verdi 3 weeks ago, taking odd jobs around town, and catching the eye of every unmarried woman and several married ones, too. With his sun-bronzed skin, lean muscular build, and eyes the color of a summer sky, he was undeniably handsome, but Hannah had no time for such distractions. "I'm fine, Mr. Blackett." Sheriff Mills scared him off before he got anything. She tucked a stray strand of honey-brown hair behind her ear, conscious of her work-worn hands and the dark circles under her eyes. Ethan stepped closer, his spurs jingling softly. "Walk you home. It's getting dark and seems the town's attracting unsavory types these days." Hannah hesitated. She'd learned to be wary of charity and the strings that often came attached. "That's kind but unnecessary. I've made this walk 100 times. 101 won't hurt then." He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Besides, I'm headed that way to check on the widow Parker's fence." They walked in silence for a few moments, passing the saloon where raucous laughter spilled out with the piano music and lamplight. Hannah quickened her pace, anxious to get home to her siblings. She'd left Sarah in charge of dinner, and while the girl was responsible beyond her years, Hannah never felt at ease away from them. "You're carrying a heavy load, Miss Dawson," Ethan said suddenly. "The whole town talks about how you've stepped up for your brothers and sisters." Hannah's spine stiffened. "We managed just fine. Didn't say you didn't." Ethan's voice was gentle, but even the strongest backs can use some help now and then. They reached the small, weathered house at the edge of town, its paint peeling but the yard neatly kept. From inside came the sound of childish laughter, then the clatter of something falling and a cry. Hannah rushed forward, but Ethan was faster, taking the 3 porch steps in one stride and pushing open the door. Inside, James sat on the floor, tears streaming down his face while flour covered everything in sight. Sarah was frantically trying to clean up, her face streaked with white. "I'm sorry, Hannah," Sarah's voice quavered. He wanted to help with the biscuits, and the flour bag split. Hannah knelt beside James, checking him over. "Are you hurt, little one?" The boy shook his head, his sobs subsiding as he pointed to the broken flour bag. "I wanted to make biscuits like Pa used to." Hannah's heart constricted. Their father had indeed made the best biscuits in Nevada territory, a skill he'd learned from his mother back in Missouri. "It's all right. Accidents happen." She became aware of Ethan standing awkwardly in the doorway, hat in hand, taking in the scene not just the flower disaster, but the darned curtains, the mismatched chairs, the single oil lamp casting shadows on walls that hadn't seen fresh paint in years. Pride warred with embarrassment in her chest. "Mr. Blackett was just leaving," she said, rising to her feet. But Ethan didn't move. Instead, he surveyed the room, his gaze lingering on Michael and Lily, who had appeared from the back room, curious about the commotion. 4 pairs of eyes, all with the same Dawson blue as Hannah's, stared back at him. "How about I make those biscuits?" Ethan said suddenly, setting his hat on a hook by the door as if he belonged there. "You can make biscuits?" Michael asked skeptically. Ethan grinned. "Boy, I've been cooking on cattle drives since I was not much older than you. My biscuits might not be as good as your pa's, but they'll fill your belly just the same." Before Hannah could protest, he'd rolled up his sleeves and was assessing what ingredients remained. "Got any more flour hidden away, Miss Dawson? And maybe some lard?" Hannah felt a flutter of irritation mixed with something else she couldn't quite name. "Mr. Blackett, I appreciate the offer, but please, Hannah," Lily tugged at her skirt. "I'm hungry and Sarah burned the beans." "I did not," Sarah protested. "They're just extra well done." Hannah sighed, then moved to the small pantry where she kept their meager supplies. She handed Ethan the last of their flour and a small tin of lard. "Much obliged," he said, and set to work with surprising efficiency, clearing space on the table and finding a mixing bowl. His large hands, calloused from rope and reins, moved with unexpected grace as he combined the ingredients. The children gathered around, fascinated by the stranger in their kitchen. Even Sarah, who had appointed herself Hannah's lieutenant in all things, seemed captivated by Ethan's easy manner and the stories he told as he worked. So there I was, facing down this ornery longhorn that had decided the chuck wagon was in his way. Cook was hollering bloody murder and all I had was a rope and my wits. "What did you do?" Michael's eyes were wide. "Well, Ethan caught Hannah's warning glance. "I managed to guide him back to the herd without much fuss. Sometimes the biggest challenges just need a gentle touch." Hannah snorted softly as she wiped flour from James's face. There was more to that story, she was certain, but she appreciated Ethan's discretion around the children. The biscuits, when they emerged from the oven, were golden and fragrant. Combined with the salvageable beans and some preserved peaches Hannah had been saving for Sunday, it made a feast that had the children eating with more enthusiasm than she'd seen in weeks. "Mr. Blackett," Hannah said as they finished, "thank you for your help tonight. We're in your debt." Ethan waved away her thanks. "No debt, just being neighborly." He stood, reaching for his hat. "But I was thinking, Miss Dawson." Hannah tensed, waiting for the inevitable proposition or presumption. "I could use some help myself. Been looking for someone to do my washing and mending." He nodded toward the neat stitches on James's patched shirt. "Noticed you have a talent with a needle." "I take in sewing and laundry," Hannah said cautiously. "But my rates are firm." Ethan's eyes twinkled. "Wouldn't expect otherwise. Thought maybe we could come to an arrangement. I need someone to look after my things, and from what I've seen, you could use an extra mouth to feed." Hannah stared at him, confused. "I beg your pardon. She has 19 with 4 younger siblings to feed," Sarah piped up helpfully, displaying her counting skills. "That's 5 including Hannah." "Make that 5 siblings and I'll help," Ethan said, his expression serious now. "Been thinking I need to settle somewhere, put down some roots. Got my eye on the MacGregor place. Old man's moving back east to live with his daughter. Got good grazing land, solid house." Hannah felt the blood drain from her face. "Mr. Blackett, if you're suggesting what I think you're suggesting, Just suggesting a fair trade, Miss Dawson. You take care of my things, cook a meal now and then, and I'll provide for all 6 of us." He glanced at the children, who were watching with unabashed interest. "Been on my own too long. Reckon these youngsters could teach me a thing or two about family life." "You don't even know us," Hannah protested. "Know enough," Ethan replied. "Know you're proud and hardworking. Know these kids are well-mannered despite their circumstances. Know I've got means to help, and nobody should have to carry such a load alone." Hannah's mind raced. Was he proposing marriage, offering charity disguised as employment? Either way, her pride rebelled at the idea of becoming dependent on a man she barely knew. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Blackett, but we're managing just fine." Ethan's gaze swept the small room, taking in the children's thin faces and patched clothes, the carefully mended curtains, and the single lamp burning low to conserve oil. "Course you are," he said softly. "Never said you weren't, but there's managing and then there's living, Miss Dawson." He settled his hat on his head and moved toward the door. "You think on it, I'll be around." After he left, Hannah stood motionless, staring at the door. "Hannah," Sarah's voice broke through her thoughts. "Are we going to live with Mr. Blackett?" "No," Hannah said firmly. "We're staying right here in our home." But as she tucked the children into bed that night, in the small room they all shared to conserve heat, Hannah found herself thinking of Ethan Blackett's offer. Not the presumption of it, though, that still rankled, but the practicality. Winter was coming, and her prospects for work would dwindle with the first snow. The roof needed patching, and James had outgrown his only pair of shoes. Pride was a luxury, her mother had often said, and luxuries were something the Dawsons had learned to live without. The following morning, Hannah rose before dawn, as always, to start the fire and put on coffee, before heading to the Donovan household, where she worked 3 mornings a week, cleaning and cooking for the banker and his invalid wife. She left Sarah instructions for the day lessons for the younger ones, bread to be baked, laundry to be hung, and headed out into the crisp autumn air. The sky was just beginning to lighten, stars fading as the eastern horizon glowed with the promise of sunrise. Hannah had walked only a block when she sensed rather than heard someone fall into step beside her. Her hand tightened on the small knife she kept in her pocket, a necessity for a young woman walking alone in the pre-dawn hours. "Morning, Miss Dawson," came Ethan's voice, and Hannah relaxed slightly, though she kept her hand on the knife. "Mr. Blackett, you're up with the chickens." "Never was one for sleeping past sunrise," he replied easily. "Heading to work," Hannah nodded, keeping her pace brisk. "The Donovans." "Mrs. Donovan needs help with her morning routine." They walked in silence for a moment, frost crunching beneath their boots. "Been thinking about your situation," Ethan said finally. "Might not have expressed myself clearly yesterday." Hannah glanced at him sideways. In the growing light, his profile was strong, jaw shadowed with stubble, eyes fixed on the path ahead. "You expressed yourself quite clearly, Mr. Blackett. You're offering charity in exchange for domestic services." Ethan stopped walking, and Hannah was forced to stop as well or appear rude. "No, madam. What I'm offering is a partnership." He turned to face her fully. "I've been drifting since the war ended, working cattle, taking odd jobs. Got a decent stake saved up, enough to buy that spread I mentioned. But a ranch needs more than one pair of hands, and a house needs someone who knows how to make it a home. So you're looking for a housekeeper." Hannah's tone was skeptical. Ethan's lips quirked in a half-smile. "If that's all I wanted, I'd hire the widow Parker." "No, Miss Dawson, I'm looking at something more permanent." Hannah felt heat rise to her cheeks as his meaning became clear. "Mr. Blackett, if you're proposing marriage to a woman you barely know, not proposing, not yet." Ethan's voice was steady, suggesting we consider it. Get to know each other. See if it might work. I have responsibilities, Hannah said, gesturing in the direction of her home. 4 very important responsibilities. Exactly why I'm suggesting this. Those children need stability, security, need a proper home with enough food and warm clothes. He paused. They need a man around too, boys to learn from, girls to be protected by. Hannah bristled. I've been protecting them just fine. Never said you haven't. Ethan's voice softened. But you're one person, Miss Dawson. Even the strongest backs need help sometimes. The eastern sky was pink now, the day fully beginning. Hannah would be late if she didn't move on. I need to go, she said. The Donovans expect me. Ethan nodded, stepping back. Just think on it. No rush, no pressure. I'll be at the MacGregor place today, seeing about the terms if you want to talk more. Hannah hurried away, her mind in turmoil. The idea was preposterous, marrying a man she barely knew for security and support. Yet it wasn't unprecedented. Many marriages in the West began as practical arrangements, with love developing later, if at all. And there was something about Ethan Blackett that intrigued her. Not just his handsome face or capable hands, but the way he'd spoken to each of her siblings the night before, treating them with respect rather than condescension. The way he'd made biscuits without complaint and told stories that made even serious Sarah laugh. The day passed in a blur of chores, scrubbing floors at the Donovans, then hurrying to Mrs. Hollister's to deliver mending, then to the general store where Mr. Peterson let her sweep and stock shelves for store credit. By the time she headed home, the sun was low in the sky and her back ached from bending and lifting. She was surprised to find the house quiet when she arrived. Usually, the children would be squabbling or playing, the noise audible from the street. Alarmed, Hannah rushed inside, only to stop short at the scene before her. The kitchen table was set with their mismatched plates and cups, but a savory smell filled the room. Sarah stood by the stove, carefully stirring something in their largest pot while Lily arranged wildflowers in a jar. Michael and James were nowhere to be seen. Sarah, what's going on? Where are the boys? Sarah turned, her face alight with excitement. Mr. Blackett brought us a rabbit. He showed Michael how to skin it, and now they're washing up. He said every man should know how to provide meat for his family. Hannah set down her basket of mending, an uneasy feeling settling in her stomach. Mr. Blackett was here. All day. Not all day, Sarah said, returning to her stirring. He came by after lunch to see if we needed anything. James told him we haven't had meat in ages, so Mr. Blackett said he'd be right back, and then he brought the rabbit and showed us how to make a stew. The door opened behind Hannah, and she turned to see Michael and James enter, followed by Ethan. All 3 had damp hair and clean faces, though Ethan's shirt bore suspicious stains that looked like blood. Evening, Miss Dawson, Ethan said, removing his hat. Hope you don't mind the intrusion. Thought the young'uns might enjoy some fresh meat. Hannah was torn between gratitude and irritation. The rabbit stew smelled wonderful, and she couldn't remember the last time they'd had more than salt pork or the occasional chicken. But Ethan's presumption in coming to her home while she was away, in taking her brothers off without permission. It was amazing, Hannah. Michael's eyes shone with excitement. Mr. Blackett showed me how to use a skinning knife and how to tell which parts to keep and which to discard. He says I've got a steady hand. And he let me help too, James added. I got to pull the tail off. Hannah shot Ethan a look that promised a serious conversation later, but she couldn't bear to dampen the boy's enthusiasm. That's wonderful. I'm glad you had a chance to learn something new. Stew's ready, Sarah announced. Mr. Blackett said we should wait for you to get home before we eat. Very considerate, Hannah said dryly. Mr. Blackett, might I have a word outside? Ethan nodded, his expression carefully neutral as he followed her onto the porch. The evening was cool, the first stars just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "What do you think you're doing?" Hannah demanded once the door closed behind them. "Coming to my home when I'm not here, taking my brothers off to butcher animals, teaching them skills they need," Ethan interrupted calmly. "Skills their pa would have taught them if he'd lived." Hannah's anger faltered at the mention of her father. He had indeed been teaching Michael to hunt and clean game before the influenza took him. "That's not the point," she said, though with less heat. "You can't just insert yourself into our lives this way. The children barely know you." "They're getting to know me," Ethan said. "Same as you are. Isn't that what you'd want before considering my proposal?" Hannah leaned against the porch railing, suddenly tired. "Mr. Blackett, Ethan," he corrected gently. "If we're discussing the possibility of a life together, might as well use my Christian name." "Ethan," Hannah conceded, "this is happening too fast. We don't know each other at all. You could be anyone, a drifter, a criminal, could be," he agreed. "But I'm not. Got references if you want them. Worked 3 years for the Bar T in Wyoming, 2 for the rolling hills spread outside Carson City. Before that, served with the 7th Cavalry until '68. Hannah studied him in the fading light. There was an earnestness to his expression that was hard to dismiss. "Why me?" she asked finally. "There are plenty of single women in Verdi who'd jump at the chance to marry a man with prospects. Why choose a woman with 4 children in tow?" Ethan was quiet for so long Hannah thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was soft, reflective. "Lost my family in '63. Pa, ma, 2 little sisters. Fever took them while I was off fighting, came home to empty house, fresh graves." He swallowed hard. "Been wandering since, working, saving. Thought I wanted land, cattle, something to build. Now I'm thinking maybe what I really want is what I lost. A family. People who need me as much as I need them." Hannah felt a lump in her throat. His loss echoed her own, the sudden vacancy where loved ones should be. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "That's a hard thing." Ethan nodded, his gaze on the darkening street. "Saw you that first day in town, herding those children to church. All of you neat as pins despite your circumstances, heads held high. Something about the way you carried yourself reminded me of my ma. Same strength, same pride." The door opened behind them, spilling lamplight onto the porch. "Hannah," Sarah called, "the stew's getting cold and James is about to expire from hunger, he says." Hannah turned, forcing a smile. "We'll be right in." When the door closed again, she faced Ethan once more. "I can't give you an answer tonight. Not asking for one," he said. "Just asking you to consider it, to let me show you what kind of man I am, what kind of life we might build together." Hannah nodded slowly. "I'll consider it, but I have conditions." Ethan's lips twitched. "Expected nothing less, Miss Dawson." "You don't come to the house when I'm not here," she said firmly. "You don't take the children anywhere without my explicit permission, and you understand that any decision I make will be based on what's best for all 5 of us, not just me." "Fair terms," Ethan agreed. "And I have one condition of my own." Hannah raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you let me court you properly, not just as a potential provider for those children, but as a man interested in a woman." The heat returned to Hannah's cheeks, and she was grateful for the dim light that hid her blush. "That's forward of you. Life's too short for anything else," Ethan said simply. "So do we have an agreement?" Hannah hesitated, then held out her hand. "We have an agreement, a trial period, nothing more." Ethan took her hand, his calloused palm warm against her skin. Instead of shaking it, he raised it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Looking forward to it, Hannah Dawson," he said softly, then released her hand and gestured toward the door. "Now, let's not let that good stew go to waste." The rabbit stew was the best meal Hannah had eaten in months. The children ate with gusto. sopping up the rich broth with the last of yesterday's bread, while Ethan entertained them with stories of his cattle-driving days. Hannah found herself laughing despite her reservations, drawn in by Ethan's easy charm and the way he made each child feel included in the conversation. As the evening wore on, Hannah observed Ethan with her siblings. He listened to Sarah's earnest explanations of her school lessons with genuine interest. He answered Michael's endless questions about horses and guns with patience. He let Lily show him her collection of pretty stones and feathers, admiring each one as if it were a precious gem. And when James nodded off at the table, Ethan lifted the boy with gentle hands, carrying him to his bed without being asked. By the time the dishes were washed and the kitchen set to rights, Hannah found her resistance weakening. Not because of Ethan's handsome face or strong arms, though those certainly didn't hurt, but because of the 100 small kindnesses he showed, the respect with which he treated each member of her makeshift family. "I should be going," Ethan said, as Hannah dried the last plate. "Early start tomorrow. Mac Gregor wants to show me the north pasture before he signs over the deed." "So you're definitely buying the place?" Hannah asked. Ethan nodded. "Papers are drawn up. Just need to do a final inspection, then it's mine." He paused. "Would you and the children like to see it?" "Sunday after church, perhaps?" Hannah considered. Seeing the property would make the possibility of Ethan's proposal more real both to her and to the children. Was she ready for that step? "I'd like that," she said finally. "The children would enjoy an outing." Ethan's smile was warm. "I'll bring the wagon around at noon." He reached for his hat, then hesitated. "Hannah, I know this is sudden and unconventional, but I meant what I said about courting you properly. Would you allow me to take you to the harvest dance next Saturday, just the two of us?" Hannah blinked in surprise. She hadn't attended a social event since her parents' deaths, too busy with survival to think of such luxuries. "I don't have anything suitable to wear," she said automatically. "I'm not asking to dance with your dress," Ethan replied with a grin. "Though I'm certain you'd look lovely in sackcloth if that's what you chose." The compliment, unexpected and sincerely delivered, brought another flush to Hannah's cheeks. "I'll think about it." Ethan nodded, seemingly content with that answer. He settled his hat on his head, tipped it to her, and was gone, the night swallowing him up as Hannah stood in the doorway, watching his tall figure disappear down the moonlit street. Sarah appeared beside her, a knowing look on her young face. "You like him," she said, not a question but a statement. Hannah closed the door, avoiding her sister's perceptive gaze. "He seems kind." "He is kind," Sarah insisted. "And he likes us, all of us. Even James when he was being pesky about the rabbit's eyes." Hannah couldn't help but smile at that. James had indeed been fascinated by the dead rabbit's glassy stare, peppering Ethan with questions that would have tested anyone's patience. "We barely know him, Sarah." Sarah's expression was serious beyond her 12 years. "We know enough. He's the first person since Ma and Pa died who's looked at us and seen a family, not a burden." The words struck Hannah with unexpected force. Had that been what was happening? Had the townspeople, for all their sympathy and occasional help, begun to see the Dawson children as Hannah's burden rather than her beloved siblings? "No one thinks you're a burden," Hannah said firmly. "You're my family, my responsibility." "But you don't have to do it all alone," Sarah said simply. "That's what Mr. Blackett's offering, isn't it? A chance for you to share the load." Out of the mouths of babes, Hannah thought wryly. "It's complicated, Sarah. Marriage is a serious commitment." Sarah yawned, suddenly looking like the child she still was. "Seems simple enough to me. He needs a family, we need help. And he makes you smile, Hannah. I haven't seen you smile like that since before. Such a simple word for the dividing line in their lives before their parents died, and after when everything changed. "Go to bed, wise one," Hannah said, kissing her sister's forehead. "We'll talk more tomorrow." As she banked the fire and checked on the sleeping children, Hannah found herself thinking of Ethan's proposal in a new light. Not as charity or presumption, but as a genuine offer of partnership. A chance, as Sarah had said, to share the load. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Word spread quickly through the small town that Ethan Blackett was buying the MacGregor place, and that he had his eye on the Dawson girl. Hannah endured knowing looks and not so subtle inquiries with as much grace as she could muster. Mrs. Donovan, bedridden but sharp as a tack, raised the subject during Hannah's Thursday morning visit. "So, the handsome Cowboy's come courting," she said as Hannah helped her sit up for breakfast. "About time someone saw your worth, girl." Hannah concentrated on plumping the pillows behind the older woman's back. "It's not like that, Mrs. Donovan. Mr. Blackett is being neighborly, that's all." Mrs. Donovan's laugh turned into a wheezing cough that alarmed Hannah, but the older woman waved away her concern. "Neighborly? Is that what they call it these days? Girl, that man's been asking about you all over town. Wanted to know if you were spoken for, what kind of person you are." Hannah nearly dropped the breakfast tray. "He's been asking about me, checking your references, more like, Mrs. Donovan said with satisfaction. "Smart man. Marriage is business as much as pleasure, especially out here." Hannah set the tray across the woman's lap, trying to maintain her composure. "Mr. Blackett and I are not discussing marriage, Mrs. Donovan buttered her toast with arthritic but determined fingers. "Yet, mark my words, that man's looking to settle and he's chosen you and those young'uns of yours." She took a bite, chewed thoughtfully. "Could do worse, Hannah, much worse." That evening, as Hannah hung laundry in the yard behind their small house, she found herself watching the road that led out to the MacGregor place, Ethan's place now, if the gossip was correct. The thought of Sunday's visit made her both nervous and excited, emotions she hadn't felt in a very long time. "Hannah." Michael's voice broke into her thoughts as he raced around the side of the house, eyes wide with excitement. "Mr. Blackett's coming, and he's leading the most beautiful horse I've ever seen." Sure enough, the sound of hoofbeats followed Michael's announcement. A moment later, Ethan appeared, leading a dappled gray mare with a white blaze down her face. The horse was saddled but riderless, and Ethan himself was walking rather than riding his usual bay gelding. "Evening, Miss Dawson," he called, touching the brim of his hat. "Thought you might like to meet Moondust." The other children spilled from the house, drawn by the commotion and the rare sight of such a fine horse in their yard. James immediately reached for the mare's nose, but Ethan caught his hand gently. "Always let a horse smell you first, James," he said. "Like this." He demonstrated, letting the boy hold out his palm for the mare to sniff before patting her velvety muzzle. "She's beautiful," Hannah said, approaching more cautiously. She had ridden as a girl but had few occasions to be around horses these days. "Is she yours?" Ethan nodded, a hint of pride in his expression. "Bought her off a man headed to California who needed the cash more than the horse. She's gentle as a lamb but fleet as the wind when she wants to be." Michael was practically vibrating with excitement. "Can I ride her, please, Mr. Blackett?" Hannah started to object, but Ethan was already nodding. "That's why I brought her by. Thought you youngsters might enjoy a short ride before supper." He glanced at Hannah. "With your sister's permission, of course." 4 pairs of pleading eyes turned to Hannah. She hesitated, then nodded. "Just around the yard, and one at a time." What followed was an hour of pure joy for the children. Ethan lifted each one onto the saddle in turn, leading Moondust in careful circles around the yard while the others watched and waited impatiently for their turns. Even shy Lily, usually wary of large animals, beamed with delight as Ethan showed her how to hold the reins. When all four had ridden, Ethan turned to Hannah with a questioning look. "Your turn," Hannah shook her head. "I should start supper." "Just once around," Ethan urged. "Show these youngsters their big sister hasn't forgotten how to ride." Pride and something else, a desire to reclaim a small piece of the carefree girl she'd once been, made Hannah step forward. Just once. Unlike with the children, Ethan didn't lead the horse for Hannah. Instead, he helped her mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist as he lifted her into the saddle. The sensation of his touch lingered even after he stepped back. "She responds to the lightest touch," Ethan said, his voice carrying a note Hannah hadn't heard before. "Just let her know what you want." Hannah gathered the reins, feeling the mare shift beneath her, responsive and alert. It had been too long since she'd sat a saddle, but the old skills came back quickly as she nudged Moondust into a walk, then a gentle trot around the perimeter of the yard. The wind in her face, the rhythmic movement of the horse beneath her, the fading sunlight on her skin for a few minutes, Hannah felt free in a way she hadn't since assuming the mantle of responsibility for her siblings. She circled back to where Ethan stood watching, a smile playing at his lips. "You ride well," he said as he helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Like you were born to it." "Pa taught me when I was little," Hannah said, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "Said every Western woman should know how to handle a horse." "Wise man, your pa," Ethan replied. His blue eyes held hers, and for a breathless moment Hannah thought he might kiss her, right there in the yard with the children watching. Instead, he stepped back, turning to the mare and adjusting the saddle. "I should get Moondust home before dark. Got a new stall ready for her at the ranch." "So it's official then?" Hannah asked. "You own the Mac Gregor place now?" Ethan nodded, a grin spreading across his face. "Signed the papers this morning. 20 acres, a solid house, good barn, enough to start something real." "Congratulations," Hannah said, meaning it. "That's a fine piece of land." "Be even finer with the right people to share it," Ethan replied, his meaning clear. "Still plan to bring the family out on Sunday. We'll be ready after church," Hannah confirmed. "The children talk of nothing else." Ethan's smile widened. "Looking forward to it." He tipped his hat to her, then swung into the saddle of his bay. "Sleep well, Miss Dawson, children." As he rode away, leading Moondust beside him, Hannah felt a curious mixture of anticipation and apprehension. Sunday's visit would make Ethan's proposition more concrete, more real. Was she ready to consider it seriously? Sarah appeared at her elbow, her expression knowing. "He brought that horse for you," she said confidently. "Don't be silly," Hannah replied, shooing her toward the house. "He brought it for all of us to enjoy." "Maybe," Sarah conceded, "but he was watching you the whole time you rode, like he couldn't look anywhere else." Hannah chose to ignore this observation, but later, as she prepared their simple supper of beans and cornbread, she found herself remembering the feel of Ethan's hands at her waist, the way his eyes had lingered on her face. It had been a long time since a man had looked at her that way, not as a responsibility or a charity case, but as a woman. Sunday dawned clear and cool, the aspens along the creek flashing gold in the morning light. Hannah dressed with more care than usual, selecting her best dress, a blue calico that brought out her eyes, and twisting her hair into a neat coronet. The children, too, were at their cleanest and best behaved, excited about the prospect of seeing a real ranch. Church service seemed interminable that morning. Hannah found her attention wandering from Reverend Thompson's sermon on patience, her gaze drawn repeatedly to where Ethan sat a few rows ahead. He'd cleaned up nicely, his usual trail clothes replaced by a dark coat and string tie, his hair slicked back with water. Several times during the service, he glanced over his shoulder, meeting her eyes briefly before turning back to the pulpit. When the final hymn had been sung and the congregation dismissed, Ethan made his way to where Hannah stood with her siblings on the church steps. "Miss Dawson," he said, hat in hand. "Children, ready for that tour." His wagon was waiting, a sturdy farm vehicle rather than the light buckboard Hannah had expected. In the back, a picnic basket was secured with rope, and hay had been spread to make comfortable seating. "A picnic?" Hannah asked, surprised. Ethan nodded, helping Lily and James into the wagon bed. "Thought we might enjoy our dinner by the creek, if that suits you. There's a nice spot with cottonwoods for shade." The 3-mile drive to the MacGregor place, Ethan's place now, was filled with the children's chatter and questions, which Ethan answered with patient good humor. Hannah sat beside him on the wagon seat, acutely aware of his presence, the breadth of his shoulders, the way his hands held the reins with casual competence, the fresh scent of soap that clung to him. The ranch, when they arrived, was more impressive than Hannah had expected. The main house was a solid 2-story structure built of local stone and timber, with a wide porch wrapping around 2 sides. The barn and outbuildings were well maintained, if in need of fresh paint, and a clear stream ran along the property's eastern boundary. "It's beautiful," Hannah said honestly as Ethan helped her down from the wagon. "Got good bones," Ethan agreed. "Needs some work, but the important parts are solid." He showed them around with obvious pride, the barn with its 6 stalls, only 2 currently occupied by his horses, the chicken coop awaiting inhabitants, the vegetable garden now cleared for winter, and finally, the house itself. Inside, the rooms were large and airy, though sparsely furnished with the few pieces MacGregor had left behind. A massive stone fireplace dominated the front room, and the kitchen boasted a cast-iron cookstove that made Hannah's mouth water with envy. "4 bedrooms upstairs," Ethan said, a hint of nervousness in his voice as he watched Hannah's reaction. "Thought the girls could share one, the boys another. You'd have your own room, and so would I, of course." The implication of his words hung in the air between them, that all 6 of them would live here together, as a family. Hannah felt her cheeks warm as she imagined it, waking in this house, preparing meals in this kitchen, watching the children grow up with space to run and play. "It's a fine house," she said carefully. "Any family would be fortunate to live here." Ethan's eyes held hers, searching for something more, but he didn't press. Instead, he led them back outside to the creek, where they spread blankets under the cottonwoods and unpacked the picnic he'd prepared: fried chicken, potato salad, apple pie, and lemonade. It was a feast by the Dawson standards, and the children fell to with enthusiasm. As they ate, Ethan talked about his plans for the place: cattle to start, then maybe horses later when he had the capital. A larger garden come spring, fruit trees along the south slope, maybe even beehives if he could find someone who knew how to manage them. "My mother kept bees," Hannah found herself saying. "Taught me how to smoke them and collect the honey without getting stung too badly." Ethan's expression brightened. "Did she now? Another skill to add to your considerable list, Miss Dawson." The afternoon passed pleasantly, with the children exploring the creek banks under Sarah's watchful eye while Hannah and Ethan sat in the dappled shade, talking of small things: favorite books, childhood memories, hopes for the future. Hannah found herself relaxing in his company, drawn to his easy laugh and thoughtful responses to her questions. "Why Verdi?" she asked at one point. "Of all the places you could have settled, why here?" Ethan considered, his gaze on the children as they tried to catch minnows in the shallow water. Wasn't planning to, honestly. Was on my way to California, thought I might try my hand at something new. Stopped here for supplies, heard Mac Gregor was selling, decided to take a look. He paused. Then I saw you in town with your brood and something. Clicked. Like maybe this was where I was meant to end up after all. The sincerity in his voice made Hannah's heart beat faster. She'd been prepared for many things, from Ethan Blackett charm, persuasion, even manipulation, but not this raw honesty that stripped away her defenses. I'm still not sure about this arrangement you're proposing, she said, needing to be equally honest. Marriage is a serious step, especially with children involved. I know that, Ethan replied. And I know 4 weeks isn't enough time to be certain. But I also know that life doesn't always give us the luxury of perfect timing or ideal circumstances. He met her gaze directly. I like you, Hannah Dawson. Respect you. Think we could build something good together, for ourselves and those youngsters. But I won't rush you, and I won't take offense if you decide it's not what you want. Hannah studied him, trying to see beyond the handsome face to the man beneath. What she saw reassured her: steady eyes, honest expression, an openness that invited trust. The harvest dance, she said suddenly. Ethan looked confused. What about it? I'd like to go, with you. Hannah smiled at his surprised expression. If the offer still stands. The smile that spread across Ethan's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. The offer definitely still stands. I'd be honored to escort you, Miss Dawson. The week that followed was a flurry of preparations. The harvest dance was the social event of the season in Verdi, and Hannah hadn't attended such a gathering since before her parents' deaths. Her best dress, the blue calico, would have to do, though she spent an evening letting out the seams slightly where it had grown tight across her shoulders from all the physical labor of the past year. Mrs. Donovan, delighted by the development, insisted on lending Hannah a beautiful lace collar to dress up the simple gown. And even Mrs. Hollister, normally tight with her possessions, offered the loan of a jet-beaded reticule that had belonged to her mother. The night of the dance, Sarah helped Hannah arrange her hair, twisting it into an elegant knot at the nape of her neck with a few soft tendrils framing her face. You look beautiful, Sarah said as Hannah pinned Mrs. Donovan's collar in place. Like Ma used to when she and Pa would go to dances. Hannah smiled at her sister in the small mirror. Thank you for watching the others tonight. I won't be late. Sarah's expression was serious. Take your time. We'll be fine. Michael promised to be good, and Lily's already half asleep. A knock at the door announced Ethan's arrival. Hannah took a deep breath, smoothed her skirts, and went to answer it. Ethan stood on the porch, hat in hand, dressed in a clean white shirt, string tie, and dark vest. His hair was neatly combed, and he'd shaved close, revealing a strong jawline usually hidden by stubble. In his free hand he held a small bouquet of late wildflowers. Miss Dawson, he said, his voice warm as his gaze traveled from her face to her dress and back. You look breathtaking. Hannah felt a blush rise to her cheeks. Thank you, Mr. Blackett. You're quite presentable yourself. Ethan laughed, the sound rich and genuine. High praise indeed, he offered the flowers. These are for you. Not much to be found this late in the season, but I thought you might like them. Hannah accepted the bouquet, touched by the gesture. They're lovely, thank you. After a round of goodbyes to the children, and a stern reminder to Michael about his chores, Hannah and Ethan set off toward town. The evening was cool but not cold, the stars brilliant in the clear sky above. Ethan had brought his wagon rather than riding, and he helped Hannah up to the seat with careful hands. The town hall was already lively when they arrived, lanterns glowing in the windows and the sound of fiddle music spilling into the street. Inside, The large room had been transformed with autumn decorations, bundles of dried corn stalks in the corners, pumpkins and gourds on the refreshment tables, paper chains in fall colors strung from the ceiling beams. Hannah felt a momentary panic as they entered and heads turned in their direction. She hadn't been in a social setting like this in so long, and now here she was, on the arm of the town's newest and most eligible bachelor. "Breathe," Ethan murmured, his hand warm at the small of her back. "We're just here to enjoy the music and maybe dance a little if you're willing." His steady presence calmed her, and soon Hannah found herself greeting neighbors and acquaintances with genuine pleasure. Mrs. Donovan, propped in a chair near the wall with a blanket over her knees, winked broadly when Hannah stopped to thank her for the collar. "Suits you," the older woman said, her sharp eyes taking in Ethan's protective stance beside Hannah. "As does your companion." The dancing began in earnest then, a lively reel that had couples forming lines down the length of the hall. Ethan raised an eyebrow in question, and Hannah nodded, letting him lead her into the dance. It had been years since Hannah had danced, but the steps came back to her as the music swelled. Ethan was a surprisingly good dancer, light on his feet despite his size, and he guided her through the patterns with ease. By the time the music ended, Hannah was flushed and laughing, more carefree than she'd felt in months. "You've been holding out on me, Mr. Blackett," she said as they moved to the edge of the dance floor. "Where does a cowboy learn to dance like that?" Ethan grinned, passing her a cup of punch from the refreshment table. "My ma insisted all her children learn. Said it was a civilized skill that would serve us well no matter where life took us." "She was right," Hannah replied, sipping the sweet drink. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was." Ethan's smile turned wistful. "Would have liked you, I think. You have the same practical approach to life, the same strength." The next dance was a waltz, slower and more intimate than the reel. Ethan offered his hand, and Hannah took it, allowing him to lead her back to the floor. As they moved together to the lilting melody, Ethan's hand at her waist, his eyes on hers, Hannah felt something shift between them. This was no longer just a practical arrangement being considered, no longer just a solution to her problems and his loneliness. There was a connection here, a spark that couldn't be ignored. "You're thinking mighty hard, Miss Dawson," Ethan said softly as they turned in a slow circle. Hannah smiled up at him. "Just considering possibilities. Any conclusions?" His voice held a hint of tension despite his light tone. "Not yet," she replied, "but I'm leaning in a certain direction." The relief and hope that bloomed in his eyes made Hannah's heart skip a beat. He pulled her fractionally closer, still proper enough for the watchful eyes around them, but intimate enough to make her breath catch. "I'm a patient man," he said, "but I admit, waiting for your answer is testing my limits." Hannah laughed softly. "Patience is a virtue, Mr. Blackett. Reverend Thompson just reminded us of that last Sunday." "So he did," Ethan agreed with a rueful smile. "Though I suspect the good Reverend has never had to wait for something he wanted quite as much as I want your yes." The candid admission sent warmth spreading through Hannah's chest. When the music ended, she was almost sorry to step away from the circle of Ethan's arms. They danced several more times as the evening progressed, but also sat out some numbers, talking with neighbors and friends. Hannah noticed that Ethan was careful to engage with everyone, from the mayor to the livery stable boy, treating each with the same respect and easy manner. It spoke well of his character, she thought, that he didn't put on airs or play favorites. As the night drew to a close, Ethan fetched their coats and helped Hannah into hers. The air outside was crisp with the promise of frost by morning, the stars even more brilliant than earlier. "Would you mind if we walked a bit before heading back?" Ethan asked as they left the hall. Such a fine night, it seems a shame to end it too quickly. Hannah nodded her agreement, and they strolled toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open country. The music from the hall faded behind them, replaced by the night sounds of crickets and the distant call of an owl. They stopped at a small bridge that crossed the creek, leaning on the railing and gazing at the water, silver in the moonlight. For a long moment, neither spoke content in the companionable silence. "I had a wonderful time tonight," Hannah said finally. "Thank you for asking me." Ethan turned to face her, his expression serious in the silvery light. "Thank you for saying yes, to the dance, I mean." He paused. "I hope it's not the only thing you'll say yes to." Hannah looked up at him, studying the face that had become so dear to her in such a short time. The strong lines of his jaw, the small scar above his right eyebrow, the laugh lines at the corners of his eyes, all familiar now. All part of the man she'd come to respect and, yes, care for deeply. "Ask me again," she said softly. Ethan's eyes widened in surprise, then understanding. He took her hand in his touch warm even through her gloves. "Hannah Dawson," he said, his voice deep and steady, "I'm asking you to make my family 5 siblings instead of 4, and let me help you care for them all. I'm asking you to marry me, to build a life together at the ranch, to be my partner in all things." He paused, swallowed hard. "I'm asking because I've come to care for you more than I thought possible in such a short time, and because I believe we could make each other happy." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes, not of sadness but of overwhelming emotion. "You understand what you're taking on. 4 children, all with their own needs and personalities. It won't be easy." "Nothing worthwhile ever is," Ethan replied, "but we'll face it together." That's what marriage is supposed to be, isn't it? 2 people facing life's challenges side by side, making each other stronger in the process. Hannah took a deep breath, her decision made. "Then my answer is yes, Ethan Blackett. Yes to all of it." The joy that transformed his face was something Hannah knew she would remember for the rest of her life. Ethan lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a fervent kiss to her knuckles. Then, unable to contain himself, pulled her into his arms. "You've made me the happiest man in Nevada territory," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I promise you won't regret this, Hannah. I'll spend every day making sure of it." Their first kiss was gentle, a promise sealed under the vast canopy of stars. When they parted, Hannah felt a sense of rightness, of coming home after a long journey. "The children will be thrilled," she said, thinking of how attached they'd already become to Ethan in the short time they'd known him. Ethan laughed, the sound carrying in the still night air. "I hope so. I've grown mighty fond of those youngsters." His expression softened. "They're part of you, Hannah, part of what made me fall in love with you." The words, spoken so naturally, made Hannah's heart soar. "Love? Are you sure it's not too soon for such declarations?" Ethan shook his head. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I love you, Hannah Dawson. Have almost since the moment I saw you standing up to that would-be thief, proud and fierce as a mountain lion protecting her cubs." Hannah's laugh was watery as emotion overcame her. "I love you too, Ethan. It terrifies me how quickly it happened, but I do." He kissed her again, more deeply this time, his arms strong around her waist. When they finally started back toward her house, Hannah felt as if she were walking on air, the future suddenly bright with possibilities where before it had been a constant struggle. The news of their engagement spread through Verdi like wildfire. By Sunday morning, when Ethan sat with the Dawsons in church, the entire congregation was abuzz with the development. Reverend Thompson even worked a pointed reference to Ruth and Boaz into his sermon, causing Hannah to blush furiously while Ethan grinned beside her. The children's reactions had been everything Hannah hoped for. Sarah, practical as always, had immediately begun making lists of what they would need to move to the ranch. Michael had whooped with excitement at the prospect of learning ranching skills from Ethan. Lily had shyly asked if she could help plant flowers around the new house come spring. And little James had simply climbed into Ethan's lap and announced, "Now you'll be my pa, and I won't have to miss mine so much anymore." The statement had brought tears to both Hannah's and Ethan's eyes, and Ethan had hugged the boy close, promising to do his best to be worthy of such trust. They set the wedding date for the first Saturday in December, just 3 weeks away. Mrs. Donovan insisted it was scandalously soon, but Hannah pointed out that winter was coming, and it made practical sense to be settled in the ranch house before the first heavy snows. Practical indeed, Mrs. Donovan had sniffed, though her eyes twinkled. "Just make sure you're not so practical you forget the romance, girl." There was little chance of that. Ethan proved to be a devoted fiancé, visiting Hannah daily, often bringing small gifts for her or the children, a hair ribbon for Lily, a pocketknife for Michael, a carved wooden horse for James, a book of poetry for Sarah, and for Hannah, wildflowers, a tortoiseshell comb for her hair, once even a bolt of fine blue wool that matched her eyes exactly. "For a new dress," he said when she protested, "it was too extravagant. Can't have my bride freezing on our wedding day." Working together, Hannah and Sarah transformed the fabric into a simple but elegant gown, with a fitted bodice and full skirt that Hannah knew would please Ethan. Mrs. Donovan contributed the last of her precious Belgian lace for the collar and cuffs, and Mrs. Hollister surprised everyone by organizing a sewing circle of town ladies to help with the final details. "Never seen a girl more deserving of some help," Mrs. Hollister declared when Hannah tried to thank her. "You've carried those young'uns on your own long enough. About time this town showed some Christian charity beyond the occasional basket of food." Meanwhile, Ethan was busy preparing the ranch house for his new family. He hired carpenters to repair the roof and replace a few rotted boards on the porch, purchased new bedding and necessary furnishings, and even had a proper cook stove installed to replace the ancient one left by Mac Gregor. "Want it to be right," he told Hannah during one of his visits. "Want all of you to feel at home from the moment you arrive." The day before the wedding, a heavy snowfall blanketed Verdi in white. Hannah watched from the window of their small house, wondering if the weather might force a postponement, but by morning the sky was clear. The world transformed into a glistening wonderland that seemed a perfect setting for new beginnings. Sarah helped Hannah dress for the ceremony, fastening the tiny buttons on the back of the blue wool dress with careful fingers. "You look like a queen," she declared when Hannah was fully attired, her hair arranged in soft waves beneath a crown of white rosebuds. Mrs. Peterson from the general store had somehow procured, despite the season. Hannah studied her reflection in the small mirror, barely recognizing the woman who looked back at her. The constant worry that had lined her face for months had eased, replaced by a glow of happiness that no cosmetic could have achieved. "Are you ready?" Sarah asked, adjusting the lace at Hannah's wrist. "Ethan will be waiting." Hannah nodded, her throat too tight for words. She was ready not just for the ceremony, but for the life that would follow, the partnership she and Ethan would build together, the family they would nurture. The church was full when they arrived, the entire town having turned out for the event. Reverend Thompson waited at the altar, beaming benevolently, and beside him stood Ethan, more handsome than Hannah had ever seen him in a new black suit, his hair neatly combed, his eyes finding hers the moment she appeared in the doorway. The children preceded her down the aisle, Sarah solemn and dignified, Lily scattering dried rose petals from Mrs. Peterson's greenhouse. Michael and James trying their best to look grown up in their Sunday clothes, though James couldn't resist a small wave to Ethan as he passed. When Hannah reached the altar, Ethan took her hands in his touch steady and warm. "You're beautiful," he whispered for her ears alone. The ceremony was simple but moving. They spoke their vows clearly, promising to love, honor, and cherish each other for all the days of their lives. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed Hannah with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. "Mrs. Blackett," he murmured against her lips, and Hannah felt a thrill at the new name, the new identity, the new life stretching before them. The reception that followed at the town hall was a joyous affair, with food contributed by every household in Verdi and music provided by the same fiddler who had played at the harvest dance. Hannah and Ethan moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes, always drawn back to each other like magnets, their happiness a tangible thing that seemed to affect everyone around them. As the celebration wound down, Ethan disappeared briefly, returning with the wagon loaded with the few possessions Hannah and the children were bringing to their new home. The townspeople gathered on the steps of the hall to see them off, shouting good wishes and tossing grain for luck as Ethan helped his new family into the wagon. The drive to the ranch was magical, the snow-covered landscape glittering in the late afternoon sun, the air crisp and clean. The children chattered excitedly in the back of the wagon, while Hannah sat beside Ethan on the seat, his arm around her keeping her warm despite the chill. When they crested the final hill and the ranch came into view, Hannah caught her breath. Smoke rose from the chimney and every window glowed with lamplight, a beacon of welcome in the gathering dusk. "Welcome home," Ethan said, his voice husky with emotion. As he helped her down from the wagon, Hannah looked up at the house that would be their home, the place where they would build their life together, and felt a surge of gratitude so strong it nearly overwhelmed her. "Thank you," she said, turning to face her husband, "for everything." Ethan's smile was tender as he brushed a snowflake from her cheek. "No, Hannah, thank you for making my house a home, for bringing these children into my life." He glanced at the 4 excited faces peering from the wagon, "for making us a family." The children tumbled from the wagon then, racing toward the house with shouts of excitement. Hannah and Ethan followed more slowly, hand in hand, ready to begin their new life together. 5 years later, Hannah stood on the porch of the Blackett ranch house, watching as Ethan taught their son, 3-year-old Thomas, to sit on a gentle pony in the corral. The boy's laughter carried on the summer breeze, a sound that never failed to warm Hannah's heart. So much had changed in those 5 years. The ranch had prospered under Ethan's careful management, growing from a modest homestead to one of the most successful operations in the area. The house had expanded too, with a new wing added to accommodate their growing family and the various improvements Ethan insisted on making to ensure Hannah's comfort. Sarah, now 17, had blossomed into a lovely young woman with a teaching position at the Verdi school. Michael, at 15, was Ethan's right hand on the ranch, showing a natural aptitude for the work that made his stepfather beam with pride. 13-year-old Lily had discovered a talent for art, her drawings adorning the walls of their home. And 10-year-old James had overcome his early shyness to become an outgoing boy with a quick wit and kind heart. As for Hannah and Ethan, their hasty marriage had deepened into a partnership built on love, respect, and shared dreams. Every promise Ethan had made, he had kept, and more besides. He was a devoted husband to Hannah and a loving father to all 5 children, never distinguishing between the 4 he had inherited and the one born of their union. "Mama, look at me," Thomas called, sitting tall in the saddle as Ethan led the pony in a circle. "I see you, my brave boy." Hannah called back, waving. She rested a hand on her swollen belly, feeling the child within kick vigorously in response to her voice. Another few weeks, and their family would grow again. Ethan looked up, catching her eye across the yard, his smile as warm and genuine as it had been the day they met. He said something to Michael, who took the pony's lead, then crossed to the porch with long strides. "How are my girls doing?" he asked, placing a gentle hand alongside Hannah's on her belly. "Girls?" Hannah raised an eyebrow. "So certain it's a daughter this time," Ethan grinned, pulling her into his arms as best he could with her rounded form between them. "Just a feeling. But boy or girl doesn't matter as long as the child is healthy and has your eyes." Hannah laughed, leaning into his embrace. "You say that every time, and I mean it every time." Ethan kissed her forehead, then her lips, lingering there with a tenderness that still made her heart race after all these years. From the corral came shouts of excitement as Thomas completed his first solo circuit on the pony, Michael walking proudly beside him. From inside the house, the aroma of Lily's apple pie wafted through the open windows, mingling with the scent of Sarah's roses that lined the walkway. Hannah closed her eyes, savoring the moment. When she'd been 19 with 4 siblings to feed, struggling to keep them all together after their parents' deaths, she could never have imagined the life she now lived, a life rich with love, secure in its foundations, blessed beyond measure. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Blackett," Ethan murmured, his breath warm against her hair. Hannah opened her eyes, meeting his gaze with a smile that conveyed all the love in her heart. "Just thinking how thankful I am that a certain cowboy rode into Verdi that day. How grateful I am that he saw a struggling family and offered not just help, but a home in his heart." Ethan's eyes softened, the same blue that had first captured her attention now filled with 5 years of shared memories. "Best decision I ever made," he said simply. "Loving you, loving these children, it's the greatest joy of my life." As the sun began to set behind the mountains, casting long golden shadows across the land they had cultivated together, Hannah knew with absolute certainty that what had begun as a practical arrangement between strangers had grown into the truest, deepest love either of them could have imagined. And as their family continued to grow, that love would only deepen, a legacy more valuable than any material possession they could leave their children. "Come inside, husband," Hannah said, taking Ethan's hand. "Your family is waiting." And together, they walked into the house that had become a home, into the future they had built with love, sacrifice, and an unwavering commitment to each other and the children who had brought them together.